I'm Ada County Sheriff Matt Clifford, and today we want to share the story of Mary Tracy, a 1980 homicide victim from Ada County, Idaho. Mary's case went cold for decades until a reopened investigation and recent breakthroughs brought new light to the case. In this episode, we will be discussing sensitive topics, including murder and sexual assault. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, I'm Ada County Sheriff's Office Chief Deputy Justin Dussault.
And I'm Ada County Sheriff's Deputy Lauren Montague. On the afternoon of June 26, 1980, a highway crew working near milepost 50 on Highway 55, close to what is now the Shadow Valley Golf Course, made a disturbing discovery. In the tall grass near the road, they found the body of a young woman. She was lying just a few feet from the pavement, her body bearing multiple stab wounds to her neck and chest. Dried blood was visible on her head, and a small piece of newspaper from a 1967 Seattle edition was stuck to her face.
The woman was fully clothed, wearing blue jeans, a red halter top, white high-heeled sandals, and a silver watch. By 4 p.m., officers were notified, and by 6 p.m., the story had hit the evening news. Just an hour and a half later, a call came in that would shift the focus of the investigation.
That call was from a friend of Mary Tracy, who had seen the news and feared the worst. Mary's friend had last seen her 2 days prior, on June 24th. Investigators quickly identified the victim as Mary Tracy. Her husband had already reported her missing on the morning of June 26th. According to the missing persons report, Mary had left her 2 daughters with a friend at the Boise Cortel Motel after an argument with her husband. Investigators learned that no one had seen or heard from Mary since the night of June 24th.
After her identification, Mary's body was taken for autopsy. Ada County Coroner Erwin Sonnenberg found 11 stab wounds on the left side of Mary's body, including her leg, arm, hand, chest, and back. 3 of them were defensive, indicating Mary had fought for her life. There were also signs of blunt force trauma to the back of Mary's head. The stab wounds indicated a savage attack, with the fatal blow being to her heart, which had caused massive bleeding. The coroner determined that Mary had been wearing clothes at the time she was stabbed, as the holes in the clothing matched the stab wounds on her body. Mary also had the impression of an unknown object on her left temple, which was caused after she died. This was the same side of her head that investigators saw a piece of newspaper had stuck to. The coroner found a partial bloody fingerprint on her back, but investigators were unable to distinguish the pattern for comparison. This fingerprint and the lack of blood at the scene indicated to investigators that someone had likely moved Mary's body to the location where she was found.
The investigation immediately ruled out Mary's husband as a suspect. Mary's husband had been in the hospital since June 23rd. With that lead closed, detectives began focusing on the area where Mary lived and was last seen, Chinden Boulevard. Now, Chinden Boulevard in the early 80s was a mix of bars, nightclubs, motels, and adult bookstores. At the time, there was a major rift between these local businesses and local law enforcement due to recent crackdowns on various illegal activity in the area. This caused quite a few issues for investigators during the initial investigation. While interviewing numerous people in the area, from business owners to employees to patrons, witnesses told investigators that they had heard rumors about a woman who had been killed at the Sunliner Motel. When detectives followed up at the Sunliner Motel for more information, the Sunliner Motel denied any knowledge of this. Later, a maid recalled finding a large amount of blood in one of the hotel rooms around the time of Mary's death, which the maid had cleaned up. Investigators found a small amount of blood when they checked it out, but were ultimately unable to find anything of evidentiary value in the room. After determining the Sunliner Motel may be a possible location for the murder, detectives conducted follow-up at all of the nearby establishments. Though they didn't acquire any information pertaining to Mary's killer, they did compile background information about Mary. Detectives learned that Mary was well known in the area's bars, clubs, and adult bookstores and had been known to hitchhike. There were allegations that Mary would engage in prostitution to earn money, as well as alleged substance abuse. Investigators also learned that Mary and her husband had financial issues and marital stress. Detectives also canvassed Mary's neighborhood. One neighbor recalled hearing a man and a woman fighting outside of Mary's residence on the evening of June 24th. The male was described as riding a motorcycle. Another said they had seen Mary riding on a motorcycle with a male subject.
Despite interviewing numerous people from the area, detectives hit dead ends and the case went cold. For decades, it remained unsolved, with only fragments of evidence and rumors circulating about Mary's death. Fast forward to August 2023, the Ada County Sheriff's Office reopened Mary's case at the request of one of her daughters. After being assigned to the cold case, Ada County Sheriff's Office cold case investigator Tim Cooper described Mary's case box as looking like a hurricane had blown through it. It contained hundreds of pieces of papers inside, including interview notes and transcripts, phone tips, and more. Detective Cooper spent months sifting through every single piece of paper as he read and organized them.
That August, Detective Cooper, along with forensic scientists from the ACSO Forensic Science Lab team, re-examined all of the physical evidence in the case. Because the items had been stored in the appropriate controlled area to preserve them, they found no concerns regarding the integrity of the evidence. These items had not been examined since 1986. Among the items re-evaluated was a sex crime kit collected during Mary's autopsy. It was sent to the Idaho State Forensic Lab for DNA analysis. Another physical item of note was the newspaper that had stuck to Mary's temple. The newspaper was an issue of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer from April 16, 1967, printed nearly 13 years before Mary's body was found. Though the newspaper was too saturated with blood to read, Detective Cooper found a copy of that issue in newspaper archives. Of particular interest to Detective Cooper was a newspaper article about Richard Speck, a notable killer from that time frame. Speck had been convicted of killing 8 student nurses in their dormitory-style housing by stabbing them around the neck area. One victim was sexually assaulted prior to her murder. This occurred in July 1966.
During the course of Detective Cooper's investigation, one suspect name began to stand out from the rest: Charles Strain. In the hundreds of papers in Mary's case file was an interview that had taken place with a jail informant named Jose. The interview note, which was handwritten by detectives, read in part, states 2 days prior to discovery of corpse, his friend, Chuck Strain, a.k.a. Chuck Tuna, came to him at 11 a.m. in the Hi-Ho Club and stated, "I just killed a girl and threw her in a ditch over in Emmett. I stabbed her." He, Jose, was put off and didn't ask any questions. Jose was identified, and Detective Cooper learned Jose had died about 30 years ago, so he wasn't able to interview him further. However, Detective Cooper did listen to the recorded interview audio, where he caught 2 discrepancies between the written note and the audio. Jose said Strain had talked to him in the Hi-Ho Club at 11 p.m., not 11 a.m. Also, Strain told Jose he had killed a girl and threw her in a ditch off Highway 55, not Emmett. This information matches with Mary's time of death and the location where her body was found.
As Detective Cooper continued to look into Strain's past, he began to uncover some unsettling things. Strain was born and raised in the Seattle, Washington area. Strain had a lengthy criminal history spanning across multiple states, including Oregon, Washington, Montana, and Idaho. Strain's crimes included charges like burglary, stolen vehicles, fraud, obstructing or delaying an officer, grand theft, and conspiracy to commit grand theft. These crimes spanned from the early 50s through the 80s. Strain also worked as an auto mechanic as well as a long-haul truck driver. During a dive into the Idaho newspaper archives, Detective Cooper found several articles from the Idaho Statesman detailing an elaborate custodial kidnapping involving Strain. According to the Idaho Statesman, in November 1981, Strain took his 10-year-old daughter from her mother and fled to Arizona, where they remained for 2.5 years until someone recognized his daughter from the side of a milk carton. Strain had told his daughter her mother and family had died in a car crash. They had been living under the aliases of Randall and Rose Ducharme during the time they were in Arizona.
On February 26, 1986, Strain was arrested and later convicted for the murder of his stepdaughter, 16-year-old Deanna Dean. Deanna had been missing for 5 years before Strain was arrested in connection to her disappearance. In the summer of 1981, Deanna went on a cross-country motorcycle trip from Idaho to Texas with Strain. She called her mother several times a week until the calls stopped. Charles eventually arrived home without Deanna. He told Deanna's mother that Deanna had stolen his money and run off. In October 1981, a hunter found Deanna's partially clothed skeletal remains buried under rocks in a steep ravine of the Spanish Fork Canyon. Her cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. Investigators did not know whose remains they were. She was a Jane Doe until 1986. Investigators found an address book near Deanna's remains and had sent letters inquiring about the young woman. Deanna's mother received a letter and contacted law enforcement. Deanna was positively identified through dental records about 5 years after her disappearance. Strain ultimately confessed to killing his stepdaughter, Deanna.
Amongst the evidence found in connection to Deanna's murder was a stack of Polaroids in Strain's possession. The photographs depicted the area near the scene of Deanna's murder. But there were also additional Polaroids from areas that weren't connected to Deanna's murder. Unfortunately, these Polaroids were destroyed in February 2023, months before we reopened Mary's case. This can be a frustrating element to cold case investigation, chasing down leads that may have been fruitful, but you're working against time and, in many cases, record retention timeframes. While questioning Strain about Deanna, investigators also asked about Mary's case. Strain had lived in the Garden City area. In fact, Strain lived next to the Hi-Ho Club. However, Strain denied knowing anything about Mary's murder.
Unfortunately, Detective Cooper couldn't interview Strain. Strain died of a heart attack while incarcerated in the Utah prison system in 2007. In a rare streak of luck, which is quite uncommon in a decades-old case, the medical examiner still had a sample card from Strain's autopsy, which contained his DNA. We submitted this DNA to the Idaho State Lab for comparison with the profiles obtained from Mary's case.
On June 26, 2024, we received a report from the Idaho State Police indicating that Charles Strain was a probable contributor to the male DNA taken from Mary's body. One sample was listed as very strong support, with a likelihood ratio of 1 in 522 octillion. The other was also listed as very strong support, with a likelihood ratio of 1 in 1.37 quadrillion. To put those numbers in perspective, it is more likely that every person who listens to this will get struck by lightning.
Based upon these recent developments in our investigation, and given that our suspect is deceased, we are closing this case. Though Mary's case is now solved, we are still hoping to find some answers.
We don't know where Mary was killed. Initial investigators believe Mary may have been killed in the passenger seat of a vehicle due to the stab wounds on the left side of her body. However, we believe she may have been killed at the Sunliner and are hoping to talk to someone who worked there during that time.
We have also been unable to track down a friend of Mary's, Lisa, unknown last name, who is believed to have seen Mary shortly before her death.
If you have information about Mary's case, please call 208-577-3102.
Thank you for listening. While Mary's case has finally been solved, we remain committed to finding answers and bringing justice to other cold cases in Ada County.